Hi, everyone. I hope you enjoyed Lenny's session kicking off today's Insights Tech Showcase. For our first demo today and our first demo of 2025, we have Orchard. Before I hand it on over to my speaker, I just want to go over a few things. Of course, we've got that chat box. Feel free to drop your LinkedIn or let us know where you're tuning in from. And then we have that Q&A box. If you have any questions, drop them there, and we'll get to them at the end. But with that, I will hand it on over to our speaker to get started.
Cool. Thanks, Bridget. My name is Rashad Chowdhury. I'm the CEO and president at Orchard, and I'm excited to talk today about how we turn social media feeds into a behavioral research lab. And the three things I hope you get out of this session is one, a deeper understanding of how the say-do gap continues to plague us in the research space. Two, how we can use social media testing, or as we like to call it, testing in the wild, to really solve this painful say-do gap. And then three, I want to share a real world example from one of our partners in terms of how they put in the wild testing to work in terms of growing their customer base. So we'll go ahead and dive in. And while I know none of us would, of course, lie in a survey, just bad research karma, right? The reality is we expect consumers to be able to predict, recall, imagine future behaviors to no fault of their own, to no fault of their own, we know that they cannot do. So what are consumers actually thinking about while taking a survey? As we can see through this visual, our friend Grace is perhaps struggling to answer questions as thoughtfully or as accurately as we would like as researchers. And she's perhaps more motivated to get to the gift card at the end of the survey. This coupled with factors like a decrease in survey respondent rates and an increase in survey fraud, all these factors continue to really amplify the challenge of collecting quality data out of traditional surveys, which results in this very painful say-do gap where consumers do one thing in a research environment and then behave completely differently in reality. Our partners tend to describe this the best in terms of traditional learning methods outside the real world are at best only directional and create the risk for too many false positives and false negatives. This is also supported through studies in terms of only about 40% of consumers actually act according to their claimed behaviors. There has to be a better way. And at Orchard, we say the solution is to go where our consumers naturally live every single day. So what do I mean when I say that? Go where they live, into the digital feeds where all of us really live every single day, and make real world choices, real world decisions. And once we're there, measure what they actually do, not just what they say. So I'm talking about clicks, likes, shares, saves, add to carts, real world behaviors that will then be more predictive of what a consumer would actually do in the real world. And just to think about that a bit further, when you think about the social media space, again, it's really a real world context where you can measure real world behaviors to then inform your real world decisions that will then drive real world success. Makes sense, right? Well, this is the potential that social media has in terms of being a behavioral research laboratory if used correctly. And this is exactly what Orchard does and exactly what Orchard unlocks. A little bit more about our approach. Again, we call it test and learn in the wild. What does that mean? More specifically, we create and design experiments, digital experiments that we place directly into the social feeds. Again, where consumers live organically and make decisions every single day. And the beauty of it is they don't realize they're part of a test. So our approach, we're not reliant on incentivized respondents. And because of that, we're able to eliminate some of that bias and that say-do gap that we saw Grace perhaps being challenged with earlier in the slides. Our platform brings together really 4 key things enabling this type of testing to happen at both speed and scale. 1, content creation. 2, unique consumer targeting and access. 3, real-world behavioral data collection. And then easy to understand predictive analytics. In terms of the use cases for testing in the wild, we go across, call it the innovation and marketing funnel in terms of testing earlier stage ideas, white space concepts, et cetera, as well as lower funnel products that are closer to being ready to go on shelf. So for example, in a white space test, we would be creating content to better understand consumer tensions, things consumers complain about, pain points, and really more abstract ideas and white spaces to then be able to create solutions and innovations from. Alternatively, in a concept test, we're testing more, call it tangible product content. So in this case, we create what we call digital prototypes to be able to measure the actual demand for those type of products. And then once we validated the consumer demand and interest in those products, we're also testing to optimize things like packaging, messaging, claims, and even pricing to make sure we're positioning the product to best connect with our consumer groups. How does this all work? So our platform, our experimentation platform, it really does the heavy lifting and works through key 4 steps, with the first one being creating socially native test assets that really, with the goal of really speaking to consumers the way they're used to being spoken to on social media. And the idea is by doing so, we're able to elicit truly authentic engagements to again garner that truly behavioral and predictive data. A typical test for us is anywhere in the range of, say, 40 to 100 creative assets. So again, can do this testing at scale. And the benefit of having the flexibility to test larger volume of content is you can test a lot of variables to really get depth of insight of what is winning and why. Step 2 is audience targeting. So we're able to target, as you'd expect, very broad groups, but also very niche and granular consumer segments. Through our platform, you can target based on historical purchase behaviors, consumer interest, more specific demographics to get very specific and really learn and reach about the consumers that are most relevant for your brand. In a typical test, we're reaching anywhere from a couple 100,000 to upwards of 1 million consumers. So very, very healthy sample sizes in terms of building good confidence from. Step 3, with the click of a button, we launch into the wild onto platforms like Instagram and Facebook. And we're currently testing on TikTok and hope to continue to be testing on that platform, but watching how that unfolds closely over the next week or so. We're also starting to test on platforms like Pinterest and Snapchat, to mention a few, with the goal of ultimately being able to meet consumers where they are across a variety of platforms. The last step, the most fun step, is identifying the winning ideas. We have a proprietary scoring index, the Orchard Index, which allows you to easily digest all of the analytics from social media and identify what's truly breaking through and what requires further optimization. a bit more on the Orchard Index. The rather than relying on single metrics, which we know is not the right way to approach social media analytics, and rather than overwhelming you with too many data points and too many metrics, the Orchard Index weights a holistic set of metrics, holistic set of behavioral metrics that have proven to be predictive of consumer action. So again, it's a easy to understand signal on performance so that you can effectively make the right product decisions and the right marketing decisions. How has this come to life for our partners? We recently partnered with Eggland's Best. They were on a mission to really reinvent and reposition their brand in an effort to reconnect and re-engage with their existing customer base, but also in an effort to connect and grow a new customer base. So we collaborated with them to test a variety of consumer interest spaces across cooking habits, lifestyles, egg visuals that resonated the most. And out of that, we were able to identify some pretty clear winners that fed into their rebrand and repositioning strategy and also into their playbook for their omni-channel marketing strategy, and ultimately led to very positive results. Some of the metrics that were impacted include increase in click-through rate by as much as 40%, increase in ad recall by as much as 6x, and ultimately growing their new customers by more than 30%. Orchard is a transformative way for brands to really tap into social media and unlock social media as a behavioral research lab and identify, predict what will actually work in market. And I look forward to you all joining us on the mission to close the say-do gap. And with that, would love to open it up to any questions.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. We do have some questions and some time to get to them. But before we dive in, I just want to remind the audience, if you have any questions, drop them in that Q&A box and we'll get to them. But to kick off our Q&A portion, how have you managed to navigate and balance brand intellectual property concerns with innovation test in the wild approach?
Really good question, and one we get pretty often, knowing that's obviously a sensitive topic to manage for a lot of our brand partners. So there's a couple things we do. One is if there's a lot of concern and risk around the idea leaking in case of really early stage ideas, we can run our testing in an unbranded way. So the brand is not attached to it. So that's a way to kind of protect some of that IP. And then the other things we can do are we can exclude certain audiences. So you can exclude anyone who works at any of your competitor brands to kind of limit that risk of exposure to the wrong audience. And then we can also manage the sample size in terms of exposing it to smaller audience groups.
Awesome. Thank you. Another question we have here is, could you share a bit about what the respondent experience like? Do they like, comment, or how do we get to know the reactions which are useful to us?
Yeah, great question. So the ad content that we would put into the wild, it would show up in the consumer's feed just like any other ad, and they would be able to either skip by it, which also tells us something, or they would view it, click it, comment, save, share. So those are some of the metrics we're measuring. And then if you do engage with the content, you're taken to a secondary page, a secondary landing page. And on that page, we can measure additional actions, for example, add to cart, or we can ask poll questions or additional kind of prompts with the idea of collecting additional behavioral data. But the goal is to make it as realistic of a consumer experience as possible, and at the same time also be transparent in terms of on the landing page revealing that this is for research type of thing.
Great. This next question we have here, you touched on it a little bit during your presentation, but with all the uncertainty around TikTok's future, can you easily add new testing platforms as consumers start using different social media channels?
Great question. And the short answer is yes. And we're actively experimenting with new platforms with the goal of kind of having a wider breadth. The one thing I'll say, we do have a bit of a preference towards more mature platforms for the purpose of research, because more mature platforms like Meta, for example, we found are more appropriate for research, and the newer platforms are a little bit more unpredictable. So still good for experimentation, and we can certainly test on there, but that's just something to keep in mind.
Yeah, absolutely makes sense. Thank you. I think we have time for at least one more question. How does your approach make sure insights are captured from niche or unrepresented audiences?
Cool, good question. And I guess I'll take a step back, knowing that roughly 70 to 80% of the US is on social media, means that pretty much everyone's on social media. So you can reach more underrepresented groups, more niche groups. It's just kind of fine tuning the targeting to make sure you're capturing those in the segments you want to learn about.
Great, thank you. And then let's squeeze in one more question here. When it comes to creating the test materials, do most brands handle that themselves, or is that something you can help with?
Good question. We have an in-house creative team, and the idea is our team can do all of the heavy lifting. So yes, we can create that content, but often we also collaborate with the brand or their agency to kind of develop that in collaboration.
Great. Well, it seems like those are all the questions that we have for today. But if you have any questions or you're interested, please make sure that you reach out to Rashed or the Orchard team. But with that, thank you so much for being here. This was a great presentation. And to all of our attendees, thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you over in the next session.
Great. Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Bridget.
Mm-hmm.